Then I came home and started The Boys because I finished The Expanse last night.
Ah. Yeah, we watched The Expanse all the way through. I mostly crocheted.
You just didn't get into it.
No, Macon really got into it. I just never could get into it. It was like I kept desperately wanting to, but I don't know what it was. Normally it would be right up my alley, but for some reason, I think it was the main character. He looked too much like Kit Harington, and he just kind of tried to smolder, but he doesn't smolder very well.
Yeah.
It looks like this 12-year-old trying to be like sexy, and it's like it
comes across as constipated confusion.
Yeah, it really did, and I couldn't get over that. I struggled, and so
he always looks, and his character pretty much does, like he needs just to sleep for about 48 hours straight.
Maybe
even when he's supposedly been on just like some normal kind of crew rotation work schedule, whatever they've got going on, he still just looks haggard.
And it's always like he's looking at the camera like he's constipated. How'd you say it? Confusedly constipated? What did you say?
Constipated confusion.
Yeah, because he's like, trying to smolder or something. I don't know. He had the same look on his face the whole time. So I thought if I crocheted and didn't look at it and just listened, that I could do that. But you have to look at it. So, because there's a lot of things that happen without, words. So.
Sure.
Anyway.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that you crochet while you watch it, because I've been just really kind of going hard on Duolingo, like my Spanish, the past few weeks. And especially when I'm watching The Expanse, because I just turn off the sound and do the can't speak or can't listen to parts right now. And so it was funny, one time I was actually like doing like the final quiz to level up, the one lesson I was doing, and I couldn't remember something, and all of a sudden it's like previously on The Expanse, and it, the moment from that episode played and I remembered what the proper conjugation for the verb was, and I was like, that is the nerdiest crap ever.
That's pretty nerdy.
Cake, man. That takes a cake. I don't know. There's a lot of nerd things out there.
Thanks, Amos.
That would be one of them. It's too funny.
Yes, it is. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and transition. Welcome to You, Me, and Your Mom, a podcast where three people get together and talk about whatever they want to talk about. I'm Sandy, and I'm your host tonight, and I'm joined by my co-host, my son, Eric.
Hey.
And his best friend, and someone I love dearly too, Brandon.
Aw, hi.
So welcome. Tonight we're going to be a little serious when we get going, but before we do all that, let's do a check-in. How's everybody doing?
Doing good. Been enjoying my new vehicle. Got a Ford Flex, which is a car I've liked for a few years, ever since some friends of ours had one and I got to drive it and would kind of insist on driving, which they'd let me whenever we'd get together. And so now I have my own, so I'm happy.
Yay.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like Flexes. They're pretty cool. We've been good. We were on a vacation last week, which in this particular climate that we find ourselves in, we didn't go anywhere. We stayed at the house and just rested, which was really nice. And you watched movies and put together puzzles. And I played a new game that came out called Last of Us 2, which I'm very excited about. I'm a huge fan of the first game, and Courtney is too. So she insists that I can't play that game unless she's watching it with me. It's like basically an interactive movie. And we watched that. And we watch horror movies, which I gotta tell.
Is that a thing you guys do?
Yeah, we do. Okay. But I gotta tell this joke. Like, it's certain horrors. Like, she doesn't like body gore. Like,
Slasher movies.
I think Courtney and I have similar tastes in horror movies.
Yeah,
more like thrillers.
Yeah, gore is okay, but it's not like body horror kind of. But I've been playing a joke on Courtney. She says horror correctly, but
Horror.
Every time she says horror, I just repeat back very slowly, horror. And that's all I've said. And what has happened is she takes it as me correcting her, which I knew she would. And she's gotten more and more conscious about that word. She keeps asking me, did I say it wrong? And I'll just say it. And I just let her and just go, horror. Go, say it again. I'll go, horror. And she's like, what am I saying? And I just say horror. I don't ever correct her. I don't tell her what she's doing wrong because she's not doing anything. I just simply say horror. And she hasn't picked up on it. She's got super conscious, and she's so self-conscious now. She's starting to say it wrong whenever she says it.
Oh my gosh, I've raised a psychopath.
So the other day she was like, you want to watch a horror movie? And I was like, a horror movie? I was like, you and I have very different forms of entertainment.
Like, well, I do enjoy the Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds vehicle.
So the culmination of this experiment was literally to get my wife to say horror movie. And I literally have been planting the seeds for 2 weeks, and it finally happened the other day. And I was like, I could walk away. Now, what's funny is I still haven't told her what I was doing.
She'll never listen to this, so.
She'll never listen to this, so who cares? So yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing. So anyway, she's been on a Stephen King kick. That's why this whole horror thing started happening, is she's been working through a bunch of Stephen King stuff. And we watched Dr. Sleep this week too, and which is a great movie, by the way. Really good sequel. Yeah, really good sequel to The Shining. Was really surprised.
The book was really good, actually. I read the book. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't remember the book. I have not read it, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. And Gregor's great, and all the cast, the girl they got in, the little girl in there is really great. Yeah, it was just good. It was a good movie. It's on HBO right now, so you guys need to check it out if you can. But yeah, Dr. Sleep, check it out. It's very good. But yeah, so she's been on the Stephen King kick, and so I've been getting a sick kick out of going, horror. Explain to her what I'm doing.
Oh my goodness.
Well, needless to say, I've had a great vacation.
Yeah.
So how are you?
Well, we went on vacation too. We went to Florida, but a different place in Florida than where you were. So, but we didn't do much. We had a staycation at our vacation. So we went to a house on the Gulf Coast, and we stayed at that house, but it had a private pool. The weather was great. I relaxed by the pool all day, every day, until it and even when it was raining some, I was still outside. There was a couple downpours I had to go in, but the rest of the time I'm sitting by the pool thinking, so if I get wet, I get wet. I'm at a pool is what I do. So I sat there. The house we rented also had a greenhouse room, a garden room.
Yeah.
Which is real. I know. It was so cool. And it had all these plants. So I went in every morning and in the afternoon too, and did my yoga twice a day, did some mindfulness inside that garden room. And I think I was the only one that went in there. So I had this private greenhouse.
Sandy's clubhouse.
I know. It's so cool. I should have put a sign, no boys allowed or something.
Today's word is banana.
No, I know. So it was really
spell the Y backwards, boys.
Yes. Oh, it was nice though. And I had a good time just relaxing, which is what I needed. I love what I do, but seeing client after client after client, as much as I love it, I get tired. And so it was just kind of nice to, my goal for last week was to restore and refresh. And that's exactly what I did, which is why I did the yoga twice a day and the mindfulness. And literally just sat at the pool. I ate at the pool. I'm not kidding. When I say I sat at the pool, that's all I did. I sat at the pool. I did yoga and mindfulness. I went to sleep. There was a hammock that was on the back patio outside the courtyard where the pool was. And there was more than one occasion, I think Macon came out and he's like, are you sleeping out here or are you coming in? And I'm like, I guess I'll come in. But it was really nice. Yeah. So that's what I did. I literally went nowhere. We had our groceries delivered there. What I didn't take with us, I took a lot down. And we had theme nights every night. So we had Moana Monday, Little Sicily Sunday, Taco Tuesday, of course. We had Hump Day hamburgers and hot dogs. I had to make up something for Wednesday. Thursday
didn't fit anywhere else. Chili special Thursday.
Yeah, well, Thursday we did do takeout Thursday, so we got P.F. Chang's.
There you go.
Because we were at the beach. We got P.F. Chang's, and then Friday was Fridge Buffet Friday. Clean it out, dudes.
There you go.
We
leftover casserole.
Yeah, well, I'd taken lasagna, and we had like tacos and everything left over. So anyway, we had a good vacation too. Anytime you can eat and sit by a pool, what else do you need?
Amen.
Well, she didn't tell y'all the funniest part. I called her to check in. I did a video chat,
Yes.
and she was showing me around the house. So she goes, "Oh, let me show you what we've been doing." And she goes into her bedroom and closes out the lights. And I'm like, this is strange. Where are we going with this? And suddenly, like, these lights popped up. And apparently, she goes, "Yeah, we've been playing with your gift that I never sent you." I was like, "What?" She's like, "Yeah, this was supposed to be your Christmas gift." It was literally virtual VR duck hunt. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. So it projects on the wall and like these holograms, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, you can play. But she's like, "Yeah, this was your Christmas gift. I never got around to sending it to you. So we're playing with it." And I was like, "Well, that's fair."
Well, see, what happened with that was we ordered it and it came in after we came back from your house at New Year's. And so then we thought, well, we'll send it to you. Then we thought, oh, we'll just take it on vacation and give it to him then. But then we weren't able to work that out. But we still had it. So we went ahead and played with it. But it's back in the box and sitting over there waiting for you.
So, Eric, what caused you to start this podcast again?
No resentment. I've completely healed a resentment. Yeah, I have none. I'm a complete clean slate man.
It's a fun game. It's got batteries in it now and everything.
They were quality testing.
She set like this ridiculously high score. She's like, boom.
Boom.
Yes.
Boom. Yeah.
Really funny. But yeah, so it was like a 10-minute call. Like 5 minutes of that was to show me how she was playing this game.
I was back in the box waiting for you. I was just quality testing. That's right, Brandon. I was quality testing.
I'm glad you took a sacrificial hit for that. I appreciate you.
Yeah. So we, anyway, it's over there, right there, waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sure. I believe you.
Back in the box. So yeah.
It never happened.
Just you're making shout. Got one. So shut up. Keep quiet.
Listen, I can't judge too much. When I was a kid, I took all my money to buy Christmas presents, and I bought Mission Impossible for my brother. And he really wanted to see it. This was like 96, 97. This was years ago. And it was still VHS. And I desperately wanted to see the movie, and I could not wait till Christmas. And I literally, one night after he went to bed, I popped it open and watched the movie before Christmas, and I wrapped it up and gave it to him.
Shouldn't this be plastic wrapped? Fell off the back of the truck, Chris. Shut up.
Yeah.
You asking too many questions, Chris. No, I can't judge you. That's why I was like, "Oh, that's cool," because you looked at me for a minute like, "What's he gonna react?" I'm like, "Nah, I'm just as guilty. I've done it before."
Yeah. I was like, man, we're probably traumatizing this kid, but
yeah, I think it's funny. My wife heard you guys. She was in the other room. She came by just grinning. She's like, "They're playing with your toys?" I was like, "Yeah, playing with toys." Yeah.
You don't think that when I played Santa Claus and I was putting those toys out, you don't think I didn't play with them? What the heck?
Yeah,
of course you play with them. That's why you play Santa, so you can play with
out the brand new Hot Wheels tracks that are scuffed up already.
Don't think I didn't play with He-Man. I've got the power, Yeah, be for real.
Well, other than free slave labor, what other reason to have a child? I'm just, yeah.
X breaks.
Yeah.
That's like one of two perks.
Comedy relief. Yeah.
What are you talking about? I never gave you comedy relief.
Yeah, whatever. Yes. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and transition. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to transition from that to our subject. Segue. There's no segue here. I suck at segues.
Y'all thought I was bad. And Sandy busted through the door.
Yeah. That's me being a counselor. I'm just right there. Hey. So yeah, we're going to go tonight we've been doing some fun topics and movies and things like that. And we're going to move tonight, though, to a more serious topic, mostly because what's happening in the world right now with the pandemic, all the civil and social justice situations, I guess, is probably the best way to say that, because it's more than one, and it's systemic, and all of this is having an impact, I think, on everyone. I know almost all of my clients, I do about 45 to 48 sessions a week, which is a lot of clients. And frankly, almost all of them are struggling right now with some symptoms of trauma that's based around the pandemic and around the political and scene and the social justice. Does that sound okay with you guys tonight?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely does. I think it's a topic that It'll be great to talk about. I'm so glad that
Sure.
you're wanting to take over the episode and talk about it. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'm not taking over the episode. That makes it sound like I had a coup. But
You can't. It was
if I
violent.
had, if
Blood
I
was spilled.
blood was spilled. But I will say, if I ever had a real coup in a real country, my first edict would be to add the P sound at the end of coup, because who puts the P on the end of coup, right? It should be coop, coop.
Could we remove the P maybe?
Well, we could do that either
Because it would
way.
still be COU,
Yeah.
different from COO.
Well, either
So we
way.
don't have to worry about people thinking that we're charging in and making warbling bird sounds.
Yeah. Okay. Coo, coo. Yeah, it's just weird. So anyway.
Anyway, now that I've completely
Now
derailed
that
this, I apologize.
Yeah, let's go back to the
Let's say,
trauma.
it's funny. This is a serious episode. I swear, this is a serious episode.
Yeah, I swear. Well, part of it is when we have all of this trauma and we're faced with it, to be perfectly honest, humor is a good way of dealing with it. So we may do that partly because that's our coping mechanisms, but partly because it is tough to talk about how we're all being impacted right now. A lot of the attention, for instance, on COVID-19, which is gaining a lot of well, it's always been in the news, but it seems like this week, with all the rise in the cases and Florida shutting down bars again, as is some of Arizona and California, and a couple of Kansas as well. And then masks starting to be required. I know in Tennessee, masks are now required in Nashville if you're in public, and in Memphis. And our governor has extended our state of emergency for another couple months. Dr. Fauci said, I read an article today, that right now the United States is averaging about 40,000 new cases, but by August he's fully expecting it to be 100,000 new cases per day. And that he's afraid, as is the CDC, that in the United States we may not be able to control this, we may be past the window of being able to control it. And this week, the EU came out and said, if you're from the United States, you can't come into Europe. They're going to open their borders July 1st. Well, I guess that's tomorrow, since we're recording on June 30th. But United States is going to be one of the countries that they're not going to be allowed. So we're facing those kind of things in the middle of dealing with the systemic racism and all of the politics around that coming to forefront in the middle of that, and having to navigate what we think about, the pandemic, and do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Then do we go out and support our economy, and how do we do that safely? On top of all of that, we also have to think through what are my parts? What have I contributed to systemic racism? What is my role in helping to make things better in this country? And when we add our political things on top of that, when we add, this is an election year, and so there's some craziness going on with politics. Whichever side you're on, there is a lot of craziness going on with that, and a lot of division. And all of that's working together to really bring about a situation where people can be very, very traumatized. My clients are going through a lot of the same cycle as you might for grieving. What we call the DABDA. They have the denial. So we'll have the people out, not wearing their masks, everything's fine. And then they'll get angry, and then we have anger, and they're just angry at everything, and then there's some bargaining going on. Well, if I do this, then this will happen. So if I go to a protest, but I wear my mask, then how do I balance the COVID with my social justice? Do I go to the Blue Lives Matter protests? Do I go to the Black Lives Matter protests? There's just so much of this bombarding us, and yet when the dust settles from this, because this has developed a huge national identity crisis that also involves a pandemic. But when this dust settles, almost everyone in this country, actually around the world, frankly, will be impacted. I have clients in other other countries. I have clients on every continent at this moment, with the exception of South America and Antarctica. I have clients literally on every other continent, on 5 continents, and they're facing the same thing. The United States racial issues where they're protesting in other countries because of the United States. It's impacting them as well. I had a client in Canada who is like, I don't know where I stand, but I need to think this through. And it's in the middle of this pandemic and I'm feeling very anxious about it. And what kind of person am I? And so she's feeling the impact of all of that. So, it's not going to be a short impact. This impact is going to be a long impact, even after everything is over. And I pray and hope to God that they'll be able to soon figure out something to do with this virus, that, a vaccine or some antivirals or something at this point. But there's that rapid shift that people have had to make from their normal life that they had, say, March 1st, to this extreme uncertainty. And they had to make that in, honestly, a matter of days and weeks. This is just June 30th. So what? April, May, June, 3 months. Here we are, 3 months. Yeah. That shift was so rapid, and they have to figure out how to reorient themselves and to adjust to these changes. And those changes happen every day. And honestly, people have experienced actual shock after coming out of that denial stage, but they have to kind of override their own coping systems to perform for their jobs, because we're still having to figure that out. If we have a job, and we're not jobless at this point, if those of us who are fortunate enough to continue to have our jobs, and how do we handle our families and our partners? We're all trying to show some competence and some confidence while we're struggling in the middle of this. This is simply a recipe for trauma. When we override our emotional experiences, the odds of long-term mental health consequences and social consequences go up in our field. And we see people dealing with relationship, social, physical, and even sexual problems that are related to unresolved traumas. And these traumas are impacting people today. And these symptoms might not even seem related to the trauma, and yet if you're trained in trauma and trauma competency, it's so clear to see them. Trauma is even more likely right now because of social distancing. Obviously I'm one of the vulnerable. I'm hoping people listen and do their social distancing recommendations. But at that same time, these requirements come with consequences, which can include leftover trauma from before, bringing it forward into now. And PTSD often comes from people doing the right thing at the time of trauma. Sometimes when we have to override or ignore our instinct to keep ourselves and others safe, this means that that experience is more likely to leave some unresolved baggage behind. Right. So I'm going to be quiet for just a minute. This is obviously a subject that I'm very passionate about and that I'm living in right now with my clients mostly. Well, and honestly with myself. I also, even though I'm dealing with clients trying to help them, I also am in the midst of all of this. So what are your all's thoughts about the impact of all of this going on in the world?
It's, I don't know about Brandon, but for me, there's so much that you just hit that you could literally spend whole episodes on one bit of that at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I often feel like it's onto the brink of being overwhelmed by all of it, right? And I think a lot of us are feeling that way, where it's just, they're starting to, in a good way that you mentioned about humor being a coping mechanism. And it immediately made me think of all the memes that have been slowly coming out, and there's more and more of them, making fun of how terrible 2020 has been.
Yeah.
There's a lot of memes on the internet, and people are like, oh, just add one more thing. Oh, of course, it's 2020. Of course it would be. And it seems like there's been so many world systems, so many issues that came to a head this spring that is just frankly overwhelming at times for a lot of people. I find that it's been my experience that I have to fight an urge just to sit on the couch and stare at the wall. And I know for a fact I'm not the only one feeling that way. As my individual thoughts, it tends to change based on the individual issue, because one of the things that I try to do to kind of keep myself sane during this time is to try to tackle each problem on its own. But the danger with that is all of this is interconnected. And so you have to not only solve the problem on its own and decide how you feel about the problem, then you have to weigh it against what else is happening out there and make sure how they're all interconnected, and you have an overall feeling about how this thing should be going forward. Yeah, it can be a trauma. We don't have time to deal with the problems because we're just trying to survive. And then we're also trying to simultaneously at the same time help those that we love and care about going through their trauma. And we're trying to all go through it together. And we're all trying to maintain a fragile balance between self-help and helping those around us. And it's just frankly a lot. And I think a lot of people are struggling. This is not even counting people who are genuinely in the fight for survival. Those that are on the brink of being evicted from their homes, because the eviction thing is going to expire literally tomorrow for thousands of, if not millions of people that have not been able to make their payment for the last 3 months. A lot of these evictions have been filed already. They're sitting in court, and they're going to start seeing these cases starting July 1.
Yeah.
And it's just you realize all these systems are so fragile. So I guess to wrap up, my initial reaction to all of this is a complete sense of, at times, of being overwhelmed by everything just kind of falling apart. I don't know. Brandon, I'll kick it to you. What do you think? I mean, is that
it's definitely been, I always kind of like to people watch and analyze how different things affect different people, and just things like that. And recently, just over the past few weeks and months, I've just been kind of analyzing myself different ways that, we've been coping to, new situations with business closures or, restaurant closures, just what have we been doing, to make up for what we used to do in the meantime? What are our coping mechanisms? What are our ways of dealing with this, trauma? Whether it's, and I'll admit that, I'm coming from a place of privilege right now. Like, my wife and I have been full-time employed this entire time. Like, we haven't had, those worries like other people have. But that being said, I've mentioned before how we're involved with this high school drama program. So that's, 50 some kids just from this year. And, we keep in contact with previous years, our alumni that go on and graduate, or maybe the kids just don't come back for a show certain years if their schedules are too overloaded. And it's kind of rough also just seeing how this is affecting the people that you love and care for, and you want to help them. And, you do as much as you can, but then through, the limits of your own abilities, or, maybe pride on behalf of certain people who aren't willing to accept, what you might be, willing to help out with sometimes. And that's their decision to make. That's fine. But, things like that do weigh on us as well. So we've been, joking that, we're doing our part to keep local restaurants in business during this time. We haven't been cooking as much. We've been relying on takeout because there's, I talk all the time about the restaurants around here. And so, we try to do that. But at the same time, there is that, it's like, well, we could, make the pasta with the salad and, everything that we prepared, and the grilled veggies, the menu that we kind of planned. Or we could just go and buy these really gooey, greasy chili dogs that sound great with some onion rings, and just comfort food, grease, calories, fat, salt, acid, all that good stuff. And I know that's a common one. I've seen a few joking posts about the COVID-19, kind of like the freshman 15 that people gain. So, people are, they can't go out. They're stuck at home eating. That's kind of an easy, natural coping mechanism that people go to. And just things that, as restrictions have been lifted in some areas, are being tightened down again here in Michigan. And the bar isn't very far from here. Actually, it's about maybe 3 blocks away from where my office is. Still working from home right now, but there's a bar in East Lansing out near Michigan State University called Harper's, and it's a very popular night spot. And on the day that they reopened restaurants here in Michigan, they did, the keeping parties, at half capacity in the restaurant and keeping parties, empty table between each full table, things like that. But it's, one of those spots that it's a restaurant and then turns into, nightclub after, a certain time. But I drove past there just because I was in East Lansing picking something up from the office, a piece of equipment I needed, and just happened to take the side road that went past it. And it was 6:00 in the evening. The line was probably about 2 city blocks all the way down, just packed in like a normal night on the other nightclub, no social distancing whatsoever. There had to have been at least 150 to 200 people in line, and I did not see a single mask. And, outside on the patios, there were, all the tables and everything, didn't really see any masks up there. But of course, people are already seated and eating and drinking. Fine. But it was, and now, 2 weeks later, because this was 2-3 weeks ago, every day they've tracked, I think last I saw officially was 76, but I've heard that there have been over 100 cases now tracked to that single bar. And that my wife saw an article yesterday that Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City saw this one case and is reconsidering lifting restrictions because of it. And it's absolutely right for that. And that's a different conversation, but I don't know, just things like that also weigh on me. Just, I understand you don't want to wear a mask. It's uncomfortable. I get it. But we're in Michigan. We're not in Tennessee or Florida or these places where it's, 100 degrees in the shade with 80% humidity. It's not that bad here, folks. And I get it. Some people do have a claustrophobia trigger or, just an anxiety from it. I get it. I understand. But there are a lot of people who don't and are just caring about it.
Well, they're in that denial stage, and that's where I think the United States as a whole kind of is right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unfortunately, with that pandemic. See, I watched that anxiety with you as you were talking about that, all of these people, they're not social distancing, there's no masks, and I could hear that anxiety in your voice. And I was feeling it too as you were talking about it. I was like, oh my gosh, but it's because they're in denial,
Well, I think it can be cultural too. This is my little tidbit here. You look at countries who tend to be more society minded as opposed to individualistic minded. Not to say one's necessarily better than the other. They all have their pros and cons. Japan, good example of this. They're very socially minded and very aware of how they impact those around them. And even before this global pandemic, it's not unusual to see a Japanese person wear a mask because they were feeling under the weather and they would be horrified if they had spread their germs to those that are around them, even complete strangers. So for years before this, it was not uncommon to see a Japanese person wearing a mask out in public because they didn't want to impact complete strangers around them. They're very socially minded. But they're very socially minded. And then you flip it. America tends to be very individual minded. They tend to, they make their own way in the world. They don't ask for help. Asking for help is weakness. You make your own self-made person and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not necessarily excusing everything that we see without the mask on this particular thing, but I do think there's a little bit of truth to that and how we approach it culturally. And having to reevaluate how we've always done things culturally. It's hard for Americans at times to really do a lot of self-sacrificing for the good of people they don't know. That sounds really, really callous when I say it like that. But it's because our whole lives we've been taught to make it our own way in the world, that you can't rely on strangers, that you have to be self-made. And as a result, it doesn't, they say, well, that doesn't, I do what I want. I can make my own decisions. They attribute it to freedom, right? It's their right not to wear a mask. And I'll be honest, wearing a mask is just an inconvenience. It's not a right. A right is worshiping the way that you want to worship, not being owned by someone else, a right to vote, a right for taxation with representation. Those are rights. Wearing a mask is a mild inconvenience. And I think people are getting that really confused, to answer that, Brandon. I think that, and I see quite a few people not wearing masks out and about. And they always come back to, well, it's my right to do that. Well, I suppose you have a right to do that. And another argument that I hear, and last thing is, well, masks are not really effective anyway. I'm not sure what they mean by that. Masks are very much known to be effective. It's scientifically proven. And I know that people are going to, we might get some comments about it, but it is scientifically proven that masks really help with droplet spreading, and that, we should wear them. And it's weird how that is all interconnected, and it gives anxiety to people that are at risk. I've mentioned several times, we know that mom's vulnerable, but my wife's vulnerable as well. My sister's vulnerable. And masks are inconveniences, but you're protecting those around them. They say, well, I don't see them out in public. They should just stay home. Well, they have to have their husbands and wives and daughters and sons go to the store for them. And if you're running around without a mask and you're asymptomatic and you give it to their significant other, they bring it home to these vulnerable people. So I'm not necessarily angry with people. I think they need to consider what they need to be doing here and why we're doing it and what the purpose is. And it does weigh on me as well, just as much as you, Brandon, that the sense of anxiety that I'm constantly trying to protect my wife, who's vulnerable. And yet so much is out of my control because I have to go to the store and half of them are not wearing masks. It pushes me into a position where I'm feeling overly protective of my wife and feeling desperate because other people are not considering how they may be impacting our lives forever. And people are going, oh, that's extreme, Eric. No, it's not. What if my wife does get the virus? She already struggles with lung capacity, being, asthmatic. And what if she does have the scarring that we do see as a result of coronavirus infection? That's compounding her problems with her lungs even more. So yeah, there's a high level of anxiety with that. And I just wish people would wear their dang mask. And that's what comes around with it. I'm not angry, but neither do I understand why they think it's a freedom when it's an inconvenience. Those are two very different things. It's inconvenient to do a lot of things. It's an inconvenient to wait till the light changes to walk across the street. But it's there for the safety of other people. It's there for your safety as much as the safety of the people in the car. So I think people are misunderstanding those two things, and it's very concerning. So I'm with you. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Well, and you just described the formula for trauma. One of the symptoms that we look for in my field when we're diagnosing trauma in clients is, did they feel like they or a loved one was in danger of being seriously harmed or losing their lives? Is there a sense of a lack of control? And you're describing that in your feelings about people not wearing masks and bringing it home to Courtney or to me or to your sister. And that's part of what helps create a trauma response in us. We move into that lower brain, into that the amygdala response, and we have that fight, flight, or freeze. And that's where we're spending our time. You called it desperate. Brandon really showed a lot of anxiety as he was talking about that. And that let me know that you guys are right there in that amygdala response. I tell the kids, we call that flipping our lid, because the connection between our lower and middle brain and our cerebral part actually disconnects. And I use the hand model of the brain, and you can find that in YouTube and see it, but it literally flips their lid. They disconnect. And that's what we do. We disconnect. And when we get that desperate feeling, we disconnect and everything stays in that amygdala, and it stays there. That's that trauma response that, is going to be there for everyone, whether you're on the side of wearing a mask, which of course I am because I'm vulnerable. I'd like for everybody to wear a mask, please. Or if you're in denial and you culturally think you shouldn't wear a mask. I've seen people be extremely vehement that they weren't going to wear a mask. And when I'm out in public, the few times I'm out, which is not often, there are a few people who give me really mean looks when they're not, because I'm wearing a mask. And I noticed the other day, we had stopped at a rest area because, you have to rest. And I was wearing my mask, and about half the people were, but there were a couple of people on the sidewalk coming towards me that were not. I didn't say anything. All I did was change my direction so that I could maintain a 6 foot. Actually, 6 foot scares me a little bit, so I wanted more of a 10 foot. But I wasn't commenting on them or anything. I was just maintaining my own personal space, and they got upset about it. And they're like, can't even walk on the sidewalk with them. Well, I wasn't saying anything about them, but it's become this whole thing because of that trauma response. People are feeling all of these big feelings, and they don't have anywhere to put them. So they're finding these issues, such as, the masks is this huge issue, which I agree, Eric, all the science is saying, duh, of course it helps. If everybody would wear a mask, we could open all of the economy, frankly. I mean, it's just kind of silly, but they focus on that. It's like, we want to open the economy. Okay, well, if everyone wear a mask, we could do it. Yeah. We could do it,
Amazing. Like, medieval doctors believe bleeding you out would cure you.
Yeah.
They may have not known anything, but they knew something, that you wear a mask when people are sick.
I know.
This has been a settled science for literally hundreds of years.
I know.
So anyway, I digress. Anyway,
I've been watching the things, but I do want to move just a little bit, because we could talk about the impact of trauma, but I am too much a counselor to stay there. I would really like to just go through a few things that might help during this time. And we talked about humor, and humor is helpful. Social media can be good or bad depending on how you do. I will say something about social media. If you have people on social media that you can't unfriend because they're family, but they post things that just incite you one way or the other, at least unfollow them. You can do that. And they still think that they're friends, and it doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. I have a long list of unfollowed people. Yeah, I just unfollow, and then I don't have to see their stuff, and I don't hurt their feelings. The worst ones I unfriend, but there are family members and things that you don't want to do that for those kinds of reasons. So that's one of the things. You can give yourself a head start in your healing, because we're still in the midst of this trauma, and I don't know how long it's going to be before we come out of it. Yeah, who knows? But we can. I'm sorry.
I apologize. I was saying that for those that are listening, and for me, I was going to ask you, what happens if the trauma occurs on a daily basis, which leads me to the racial divide that we have in America, being a minority, and you have to deal with trauma every day on a horrific scale that most of us will never understand.
Right.
How do you deal with trauma in a positive way that occurs to you over and over and over and over again?
Well, the first thing you have to do, honestly, is recognize that this is trauma. It's sometimes people feel like they're being overly dramatic, but this is serious trauma, and it's going to have long-term effects. The systemic racism, the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, these kinds of events just emphasize the trauma that people are feeling. And it grows, because if I were a young Black man, frankly, and we go back to the masks, what if it's raining and I'm cold and I pull my hood up on my hoodie and I have on a mask and I'm a young Black man? I'm in danger of being killed. And I know that sounds a little dramatic, but it's true. It's possible. We have some diversity now in our neighborhood, which is good. We didn't at first. I was the only color, and I'm not that colorful. So, we have a bit of diversity, which is great. And, I talked to some of these men, and they're wonderful people. But I happen to know that if they were to walk through our neighborhood with a mask and a hood because they were cold or whatever, they would not be treated the same as if my husband walked through the neighborhood with a hood and a mask. So we have to recognize that this is trauma on a daily basis. So the first step is actually recognizing it, and then starting to really focus on some self-care stuff and being aware of what's going on. So the first step in that, honestly, is just frankly being aware of your emotions. How am I feeling? Emotions are important. We counselors have a stereotype of we're always going, how does that make you feel? Right? My family jokes about that with me all the time. So how's that make you feel? Well, you know what? Feelings are important. They're not necessarily facts, but they are important. And recognizing that in the midst of all this trauma, you can't just let all of your emotions freely come out at any time, but you can recognize when you're overriding them. Log that situation, and then go to someone you trust, a family member, a friend, a priest, a rabbi, a counselor, and share that emotional experience with them. It's amazing how powerful this can be, and it decreases that chance that you'll hold on to that traumatic feelings after the crisis passes. So after this is all over, you want to dump all that out that's been in your mid and lower brain. You want to take it through your frontal cortex, and you want to process it and think through it, but you can't do that in your head. You have to express this either verbally or in written form.
So yeah, I appreciate it, Mom. Yeah. Transferring them over, and processing. I've had a lot of experience with that, and I think I've certainly talked about that quite a bit. And I think that's one of the reasons I know that Mom and Brandon and I wanted to talk about this, is constantly encouraging those that are out there to start talking about this to someone that you trust. We're seeing a lot of that. People are talking a lot about what's happening, but they're simply talking about what's happening, and they're not encouraging each other to get this out and to process it. Because when you talk about your feelings, you talk about how it's causing apprehension. You're talking about things that are genuinely hurting you. You begin to go through that process where you're resolving and steadying your mind and getting that burden off of you. It's amazing. I'm always reminded by a quote from Rowling in Harry Potter, where Dumbledore says, "I find words are the most exhaustible source of magic."
Yes.
And he's talking about how they can be used for great good. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, is the magic and the power that your words have when you take your thoughts and feelings and you give them to someone. And it's so important that we do that without fear or without judgment, and finding someone that really matters to you to do that. And another thing that I encourage, and this is from years of working through things myself, I know I've talked about my near-death experiences, and is not always do we need a solution. This is just my practical experience. Sometimes we just need to listen to someone. Mm-hmm. If they ask for advice, sure. But sometimes you just sit down and you just say, what's going on? And you listen and you say, I'm so sorry you're going through that. I'm so sorry. I grieve with you. And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's so important. And I'm a guy, and I know a lot of guys are this way. It's our instinct to just want to solve the problem. And I know there's plenty of ladies who do the same. But there are times where it's not for you to fix. It's for you to listen. And that brings me up to an interesting point. And I probably should take more of a full episode to talk about the civil unrest that we see in America today. But what your friends, your minority friend, your African American friend, your Asian American friend, your Native American friend,
PSC friends,
yeah, anybody who's not white, to be honest, when they approach you, they're not necessarily looking for you to solve the system. They're hoping that you listen to them and really connect to them. And that's so important, that sometimes we just listen. Now, there is a time for action. And this would be a time for action that we see going on right now. But sometimes they just need to know that you know what they're going through. And it is your responsibility to listen to them. It is your moral imperative to listen to them and truly empathize with them. They're trusting you with a hurt and a trauma that they have experienced their entire lives. And the least we can do is to listen to them and respect what they have to say and make considerations on what we can do to change our behavior to help them heal from their trauma. Likewise, the same for you. That when the tables are turned, you can go to those that you trust to listen. And when it's appropriate to take a time for action, it's time for action. So I think that I definitely want to implore people out there to consider these things as they're going forward. Yeah.
Well, that brings us really to another way that we can help kind of decrease the impact of trauma as we are living in this without knowing how long it's going to be here. And you said connection. Connection is required to navigate this through trauma. That in-person connection, it helps us cope with stuff. And, although we're fortunate to be able to connect online, we also have to be real about the limitations of online connections. It's helpful, but it's not quite the same as in-person contact. And so again, by doing the right thing and we're committing to social distancing, we're having to override this really important need. And so I recommend that people, stay aware of that limitation. So while using this technology, while we're required to do this, when that threat passes, as soon as we can, make an effort to engage in social connections to help reacclimate. And it may be that we'll have to do it with masks for a while. I don't know what that's going to look like, but, just really pay attention to that connection. And like you said, Eric, if you have friends who are minority, especially those who are African American right now, they're struggling and they're looking for some empathy, not sympathy. And there is a difference. And if any of our listeners don't know the difference between sympathy and empathy, Brene Brown has a YouTube video. It's about 3 minutes long. It's a little animated short. Sympathy versus empathy. Go watch it. It's amazing, and it will really help you to know that. Remember, too, that people are really hard on themselves for how they're coping with the trauma. We kind of downplay our intense emotions, and we tell ourselves that we shouldn't have them. I mean, my gosh, we're privileged. We're living at home. Many of us still have our jobs because we can work from home. And I've heard clients say, I have this great life. I'm not jobless, and I have my kids, and we're all safe, and everyone's fine. And so I feel guilty for having these intense emotions. But we're all facing this pandemic. We're facing the social justice issues. We're facing this political climate. We're facing all of this together at the same time. Those who are more privileged, of course, may not face all of the trauma that everyone who is not privileged faces, but we all face trauma right now. All of us are, whether we're recognizing it or not. So don't downplay it. Do the opposite. Just be kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace and accept that emotions that you're having are just there. And if you do that, it'll decrease the likelihood that these emotions will stick with you in a negative way. And if you notice someone seems to be stuck after they've come out of denial, support them. You'll be amazed just how much you can build your own resilience to trauma by supporting someone else. This is called co-regulating in counseling. And also, remember that you can do some amazing first aid for this and still walk away with leftovers from a traumatic time. Trauma isn't about weakness. It often comes from us trying to do the right things in challenging times. But the good news is there's a lot of therapists like me out there. We're trained in trauma. We can help if you're having problems, but you also have friends and priests and rabbis and things like that you can go to just to talk, just to get it out, just to express what's going on and recognizing when you need help. Those highly important to just pay attention to what's going on and not being afraid or ashamed to recognize that you may be having some traumatic experiences or at least some intense emotions.
Yeah. I would encourage those also to kind of look into how to deal with stress as well. I know we did an episode several weeks back, and those that are listening, I definitely would encourage you to go back and check that episode out. Mom dropped some really great truths on there and some great ways to deal with stress and stresses in our lives on a daily basis and how to overcome that and how to manage it. I definitely want to check that. But our episode is not the end all to that conversation. Definitely want to get out there on the internet. Definitely want to get on YouTube. Find out how different ways to deal with stress that best works for you. And that's the thing about dealing with stress and trauma. Everyone's unique. So their form of dealing with it, their form of processing, their form of resolving it, it's going to be slightly unique for every single person. And some things work better for others. So take your time and just keep at it. And if a particular way of processing doesn't necessarily connect with you, that's fine. That doesn't mean you're broken. Doesn't mean that you're a broken individual or a weird human. That simply means it doesn't work for you. And find another method that does work for you. The key is to not give up on working through your trauma. That's the key. And for someone who's experienced deep, deep trauma, near-death experiences, a troubled childhood at times, I'm telling you right now, the key is not to give up. And it may take a long time for all of us to process this. It may take years, in fact. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The key is that you're trying to be 1% better every day than you were yesterday. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's a journey. And that's something that's really hard for a lot of us. I know for me, I'm definitely a destination guy. I don't care about the journey. I care about getting there and doing whatever I want. But this is the one thing you can't. You have to sit back and take in the journey, not the destination. Because life is a place that you never arrive until you're dead. Just to be very honest. This is about the journey. So, yeah, I would implore those. Don't get up frustrated with yourselves, but don't give up either. Just keep trying, and you'll get there eventually where you feel more resolved. But the key is don't give up, don't lose patience.
And I've said it before, make sure you have a good support system. I know it's tough a lot of times to reach out for some people, especially when you're really going through the hard times. You don't want to, you feel like you're burdening someone else with that. And most people are at least willing to help you bear that burden somewhat. They might not be able to fully take it on for you, but they can at least let you know they're thinking of you or something. I say it a lot with certain friends of mine. We're always told, and Eric even mentioned earlier, culturally, got to do this on your own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't show weakness. And I tell my friends all the time, it is okay to be weak. Let us be strong for you. I actually just told that to a friend of mine tonight who's going through some rough times. And it's kind of funny because she always yells at me for not using her name, but I think this is the one time she wouldn't want me to use her name. But she knows who she is, and she's listening now. But, like I said, and like I just told her, we don't have to be strong all the time. And it's hard realizing that. That's a big breakthrough. And it's not easy because you have to make yourself vulnerable to somebody else, or maybe somebody's else, multiple people. If it's something that's really, really affecting you and you need that extra support, that's where true strength comes in. One of my bosses one time told me, because I don't like telling no to people, you feel like you're letting them down. It's not weakness to ask for help. That shows strength because you're making up for the holes you can't see. What weakness is insisting you can continue doing it when you're not producing results that you need. And it wasn't a reprimand or anything like that. It was, just some advice at the time. And I've taken that with me, and you can apply it anywhere in life. It's not weak to ask for help. It's showing that you acknowledge, you can't handle everything, and where your weak spots are, and how to best fill that so that you can produce the best results. And sometimes the best results is just taking care of yourself. It's, taking the bubble bath, or, going for the jog, or just cuddling with the dog for an extra 2 hours when you should have, maybe been reading or something. Can't do anything else if you don't take care of yourself first.
So true.
Yeah. And that support group really moves to that thought of post-traumatic growth. Crises can produce a collective version of post-traumatic growth. You know, there's a lot of research around bombings, tsunamis, earthquakes, hurricanes, and people tend to sometimes come together, like you were talking about, Brandon, in that social support way and act selflessly, and they learn to care deeply for one another. So like if you guys, well, you're old enough to remember September 11, 2001. Yeah. So after those terrorist attacks, there was volunteering and charitable donations shot up across the U.S. After the 2004 bombings in Madrid, psychologists found that the attacks socially magnetized Spaniards, and it created a flurry of emotional conversations that led to decreased loneliness and increased solidarity. So that goes to that support system that you were talking about, Brandon. And Eric, it goes to that collective thought that you were talking about, working for the good. They've learned that surveys of war-torn communities across the world, they found evidence of increased civic engagement and altruism. So for all the horrors that's going on right now in our country and in our world, it has also unearthed wells of empathy and togetherness. You know, people in a lot of countries have created mutual aid forms to help vulnerable neighbors. Social distancing is a global act of social cooperation. Those that are doing it, there are a lot. We talk about those who aren't, but there are a lot of people who are wearing masks and who are social distancing. You know, this is something that people are doing because they're more than willing to engage in what's framed as an act of kindness rather than self-preservation, because that social distancing and wearing masks is all about taking care of your neighbor more than taking care of yourself. But post-traumatic growth differs from recovery. It's not a return to normal, and we may never, ever return to what we, actually, I expect that we won't return to what we were before March 1st or February. But post-traumatic growth is a creation of a stronger new normal. You know, none of us want this pandemic. None of us wants this civil unrest. But the United States could, in a lot of ways, benefit from some cultural shifts. We need to think things through a bit and figure out where we are and shift our culture. In the 4 decades before this coronavirus outbreak, depression, isolation has been creeping up steadily, and empathy has been dwindling, actually. A couple years ago, they did a social survey, and they found that only about 35% of Americans believe that most people can be trusted. About half other people that answered think that people are just mostly looking out for themselves, and this can damage mental health and emotional health. But this pandemic has also exposed some really vast inequities. Black Americans have died at twice the rate of whites just in the pandemic. That murder of George Floyd last month or a few weeks ago, it's resonated as a traumatic example of both the unequal treatment of Black people in this country and the constant threat of violence that people of color live with. Poor workers nationwide have not had the luxury of sheltering at home. A lot of Americans are grieving, and tens of millions are now unemployed. You talked about the eviction. Well, at the end of July, the extra help that those who are unemployed is going away. They're calling it a financial cliff is looming here in just a few weeks. So in the wreckage of this pandemic and all of these things, our society has a chance and could make some immense, badly needed improvements. You know, for instance, if COVID testing can be made free, why can't cancer screening? What does our society owe our essential workers who risk themselves to protect others? Our first line workers, our grocery workers who kept our food coming, people like Brandon who delivered my orders so I didn't have to go to the store. You know, people are used to being used to things. You know, the rhythms of our lives, the norms of our culture, they're like clothes we put on in the morning and barely notice by lunchtime. We forget that there could be anything else. But then things come along like traumas, like pandemics, like social unrest, and they break patterns. And adversity, when it comes along, whether it's personal or collective, and this is both, it reveals to us ourselves. We're unfinished, ourselves and our countries, and our global nations, but we have choices left to make. And the question is whether and how we're going to choose to grow from this. That is post-traumatic growth, recognizing that there's never going to be a going back to what we were before, but it is a chance to become better than we've ever been before. And that's growth. Does that make sense?
No, that makes total sense.
Absolutely.
You know, people always talk about these stories of people, you know, going on from a traumatic event and growing as people. But, you know, when you're dealing with people, you deal as society as a whole. It makes complete sense that society has to do the same thing.
Yeah.
You don't always want times of adversity, but times of adversity shows you the greatest strength. And it's our choice how we're going to handle this and how we're going to respond to it. Right now, we are kind of divided on how we're going to respond to this. Hopefully we can coalesce very soon because, we have an opportunity to do something amazing and to rebirth, if you will. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the time. So I think we're going to wrap. I know it went really fast, didn't it? So going to wrap this up tonight. I hope that we were somewhat helpful to our listeners with this. If you have comments, we would love to hear from you. If you want to get in touch with us, we do have a Facebook page. You can just look for you, me, and your mom, and you can leave a comment there. We also have an Instagram that is you, me, your mom, 99 on Instagram. And if you want to leave us a voicemail, that's actually pretty easy. On most of the podcast platforms, there's a place that you can just look up and it says leave voice message. Just click that and tell us what you want to tell us. If you want to be on the air, tell us something and we will put you on the air from your message. Another thing that you can do, you can actually email us. You can email us at you, me, your mom, 99 at gmail.com. And Brandon, that is spelled
YOUMEYOURMOM 99 at gmail.com.
I just love that. I just love that. So we thank you very much for listening to us. And remember, things could always get worse. Have a good night.
That statement might be a question. I'm sorry.
I know. Like, okay, well.
We're only halfway through 2020. We'll find out.
You'll stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.